The Monongahela National Forest is a U.S. national forest located in eastern West Virginia, which protects more than 921,000 acres of stunning Appalachian scenery. Within its borders are some of the most fascinating and unique destinations in the entire mountain range, which I can't wait to share with you all in today's video. I got to visit the area with my buddy Evan this past October on a week-long road trip across the Virginias. The Monongahela made for probably my most anticipated day of the trip, as several of these spots had been on my bucket list for years. This includes Seneca Rocks, an impressive set of rocky fins which has a via ferrata built into it. For those unfamiliar, a via ferrata is a series of fixed steel cables, ladders, and rungs that are attached to a rock face, and the one here in West Virginia is often rated among the best in the United States. I actually have a full separate video about that experience, so feel free to go check it out. I'll leave a link in the description for those interested. But there is so much more to this national forest than just Seneca Rocks, and I think the variety and things to see will surprise you considering all the locations are within just a few hours of one another. We begin our one full day in the Monongahela with Blackwater Falls State Park, the northernmost spot in the video, just a few miles away from the border with Maryland's Panhandle. The park was established in 1937 and offers an impressive variety of things to do in of itself. We made two stops while here. First, for the namesake of the park, Blackwater Falls. It can be accessed by an easy half-a-mile boardwalk trail, which is very nicely built and leads to several advantages of one of the most picturesque waterfalls in West Virginia. The 62-foot high cascade is absolutely stunning with its unique shape and location in Blackwater Canyon. It gets its name from the watercolor, which is typically darker than most waterfalls. Though it wasn't super obvious for us, I was enamored by how beautiful of a scene this was. The crisp morning air with views like this really can't be topped. Blackwater Falls is typically featured on calendars and advertisements showcasing natural landmarks, and it's not hard to see why. Very strong start to our day. On the opposite end of the park is a less than 1 mile round-trip hike to Lindy Point, which I expected to be a lot more popular considering how much I'd seen of it over the years. But there's really only space for like 4 to 5 vehicles, and the trail itself is quite narrow. It starts as a typical dirt trail before transitioning to a boardwalk where it drops you off on an observation deck. This view is absolutely unreal, seeing as it's in the same park as Blackwater Falls, potentially even exceeding it in quality. Lindy Point is situated on the rim of Blackwater Canyon, along with a 35-foot tall balancing rock nestled above the 1,000-foot deep gorge, just for good measure. The formation really didn't need to be here, as Lindy Point stands its own, but the fact that it is creates such an iconic foreground to this dramatic overlook. The gap in between the mountains where you see Blackwater River snake its way around ridges is an incredible touch, and to top it all off, there was some nice fall foliage which came through as well. Not peak color by any means, but still plenty enough to add to the scenery. Blackwater Falls State Park is such a cool part of this national forest. The fact that you have such an impressive waterfall and some impressive overlooks is really nice, and the fall color, oh man.
That was amazing. I honestly yesterday did not really expect the fall color on this trip to be that gray after doing Shenandoah, but here it's like almost peak. Oh man, that was just fantastic. I really enjoyed that overlook even more in the waterfall, but the waterfall itself was really cool still.
Honestly, I doubt there's too many state parks that top this in the eastern United States. The combination of waterfalls and mountains are a parallel I greatly appreciate, and these were just two of the many attractions here, so I'd love to return at some point and see more of it. From Blackwater Falls State Park, we had about an hour drive to the Dolly Sods, which I'd been yapping about for basically the entire trip thus far. Just a heads up, this is the only spot in this video only accessible by a non-paved road, but considering it's also easily my favorite, I'd say it's more than worth the effort. In a typical sedan, we were completely fine, but the road honestly was a bit scary since it was relatively narrow with steep drop-offs, and because of how popular the Dolly Sods are, there were many cars that we had to squeeze by heading in and out. Once you reach the top of the mountain you're driving up, there will be a long parking lot which, much to my surprise, was nearly filled up despite the fact that it was very early in the day. The area we visited is the Bare Rocks Preserve and features some interesting rock formations in addition to the unbelievable landscape. There's about a mile round-trip hike that we did just to get a good feel for what the Dolly Sods are like, and when I tell you our jaws were on the floor. We made it to the Dolly Sods! It is so cold and so windy, this is crazy! And I get why this is one of the most popular spots in West Virginia, because this scenery is ridiculous. This is one of the most beautiful and unique places I've maybe ever visited in the United States, east or west. The reason for the art palette you see before you is because of the location atop a rocky, high-altitude plateau which is incredibly expansive and mimics landforms typically found much further north in Canada. From what I understand, we were several weeks off from visiting during peak color, and yet I would have never been able to tell. Don't get me wrong, I bet it's beautiful in the spring or summer too, but I felt like we had timed this plenty good enough. Facing east towards the mountains were some enchanting views from 4,000 feet high with amazing layering and nice orange fall foliage. but facing west towards the never-ending expanse of meadows was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Put these two together, and I'd go as far as to say the Dolly Sods were the most amazing place we visited on the trip, and potentially that I've been anywhere in the eastern US. I mean, it's not better than full-size national parks like the Smokies or Acadia, but that's not really a fair comparison. Just as an individual spot, it could be the best. I will never forget our experience here. And mark my words, I will be back to do a longer hike here at some point. There are several routes that lead to incredible overlooks or other destinations that were simply too time-consuming to tie in with everything else we wanted to visit in the area. I'm talking 10 to 15 mile hikes, but with the little bit of the wilderness area we experienced, I feel as though we got a great feel for what it's like.
Oh my gosh, I don't know how well the camera picked up that was like an actual wonderland. That was absolutely outrageous. That cannot be West Virginia. Oh my god.
That's easily one of the coolest things we've seen the whole trip. That was just amazing. I was like going into it with not kind of high expectations, but that just blew any expectations I had out of the water. That was crazy.
Moving on, we take a 45-minute drive south to another highly anticipated spot, Seneca Rocks. I actually mentioned this briefly in my video from Nelson Rocks because this is essentially its bigger, badder relative. It doesn't have a via ferrata attached to it, but there is a 3.5 mile round-trip hike to its summit. You begin with a pretty nice view of the formations from a bridge which crosses over a stunning river. This is a strong start to the hike, but the view could have been better with all the trees in the way. If you're looking for an entirely clear view of the rock formations, head to the campground or main picnic area. This is absolutely gorgeous with the meadow down at the bottom and Seneca Rocks towering above the landscape. It's about 2,400 feet high with the top of the rocks rising nearly 900 feet above the valley below. As a result, your elevation gain on the hike is nowhere near 2,400 feet and is far more manageable. But having said that, difficulty-wise, this was a fair bit more strenuous than anticipated. Nothing too terribly bad, but I think because of all the hiking we had done the past few days, our legs were not having it. It also may have been disguised to be more difficult than it was because it's not very engaging after the bridge. You're pretty much covered by trees the whole time, climbing switchback after switchback with an occasional set of stairs. While the route wasn't all that exciting, this did make the reveal of the mountains quite sudden and grand. There's a nice observation deck right before you get to the rocky fins, and it's a nice spot to catch a break before things get real again. You'll notice this sign that says, "You alone are responsible for your safety," and normally these disclaimers exaggerate, but in this case seriously watch your step as you navigate Seneca Rocks. It is a must-do, and you'll see why in a second, but be careful.
Oh, the top of Seneca Rocks is so cool, and I'm like at the very tip top where you can kind of just see the whole ridge going out in front of you. This is crazy, guys.
While the mountains around this area are very pleasant, the rock formations easily steal the spotlight. Oh man, Seneca Rocks is just so cool and surreal to be on top of. Seeing the narrow rock jet across the landscape was as satisfying as can be, and I especially loved the part separated from the rock that we were on. You just had the spire shoot up almost vertically out of the ground. We saw lots of rock climbers trying to summit that portion as it's the only way to reach the top, but that's not something I'll ever do, so I'm more than happy with the views from here. Speaking of which, one of the best angles you could get to was only accessible by this little slot canyon thing we squeezed through. I'd never heard or seen any mention of this from anyone, so this was a pretty cool discovery that we made. All in all, even though the trail to reach this point was uninteresting and maybe even a little boring, the payoff was so good that it still easily makes Seneca Rocks a highlight of the area and of our trip. As expected, I definitely prefer the experience at Nelson Rocks just for how special the Via Ferrata was, but in terms of one singular view, this was absolutely the best between both spots.
Seneca Rocks, I mean, it's iconic, but it's also just absolutely amazing once you get up there. The hike itself, a little bit of a slog, not the best, but honestly, that view from the top and just looking out at the ridge.
Yeah, that hike blew me away. Like the hike itself isn't great, but once you get up there and you're able to just climb on the rocks freely and get different viewpoints, it's so cool. I mean, it's just definitely one of the most unique things on the east. You wouldn't really expect to see this out here. It's just in West Virginia of all places, but it's just so cool. And the view right now looking at it's just, man, it's insane. You got to come here.
It reminds me a lot of the chimney tops that I did in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee. Same kind of thing where the hike is just not that great, but then the final payoff is unreal.
Up next, a 35-minute drive south to the top of Spruce Knob, the highest point in West Virginia. To get here, you'll be driving on a very similar road to that of the Dolly Sods, only this is fully paved, which is always a plus. The views on the way up are more exposed, really nice scenery, and then when you get to the top, there's plenty of room to park even on busy days. The trail we took is just over half a mile round trip and completely flat. There isn't much to look at except for a few moments, such as this small observation tower. There's a spiral staircase up to the top, and then you'll have officially made it to West Virginia's high point at 4,863 feet high. Unfortunately though, trees block most of the view from here, which was rather disappointing, but if you continue on the trail, you will eventually get to some open areas. Facing west, the rolling mountains are absolutely breathtaking, though I was surprised to see that hardly any of the trees out in the distance were alive. We wondered if maybe this had something to do with Hurricane Helene coming up through this area recently. But then facing east back the way we came, completely unaffected. And I'll add that the views facing this way were quite a bit better, which is saying a lot. The mountains are higher and more defined with lots of ridges coming off of them. From here, the trail loops back around to the parking lot and you pass through a very pleasant alpine forest.
I really wasn't expecting this, but we actually found an alpine forest up here because of the colder climate and the higher elevation. So you get a lot of really cool mossy rocks down here and some really interesting shapes on the trees. Like look at how this one spirals up. It's really cool.
We were hoping for another opportunity to look east since the scenery was quite dramatic, and indeed there were some pull-offs we missed on the way up that you could use to get more perspectives. This was really great, and if you look out in the distance you could see Seneca Rocks too. Although there's not a ton to do at Spruce Knob, I was thoroughly impressed by the viewpoints and would consider it a must-do in the area.
I was actually thoroughly impressed by Spruce Knob. What a cool high point. One half of the view was actually completely dead. We still really liked it, but that was a little bit weird and maybe a little disappointing. But then the other side, super vibrant, really nice fall colors, and very expansive. So overall, it was a great time.
So, while Blackwater Falls, Dolly, Sods, Seneca Rocks, and Spruce Knob are like the big four in that immediate area of Monongahela National Forest, we were headed towards New River Gorge National Park for our final day of the road trip, and on the way came across Falls of Hills Creek to our south. Falls of Hills Creek is located right off the Highland Scenic Highway, and upon arrival I was surprised to see that we were the only ones in the parking lot, especially since this trail is far from difficult at 1.5 miles round trip. It's mostly a traditional dirt trail, but also features paved sections and boardwalks, making it even easier than it would have been otherwise. There is 265 feet of elevation gain on the way back, however I didn't find it to be difficult at all, especially since it's almost all steps as opposed to switchbacks. The forest you hike through is actually gorgeous, and there was some respectable fall color when we visited, namely yellows and oranges. You'll follow Hills Creek the entire time, and that too was stunning. There's 3 waterfalls along the route, and pretty early on you'll stumble across Upper Falls. This is rather uneventful as the view is blocked by a rock overhang, but it's just a 25-foot drop anyway, so it's not all that impressive. The Middle Falls is a fair bit better at 45 feet and comes with a clear view straight out in front of you. I like its rocky surroundings, but it's not so well defined and still on the smaller side. Finally, the lower falls make for a great finale, as it's by far my favorite of the 3 tiers, and the corresponding trail just beforehand is incredibly well designed with the wood stairs. The height is 63 feet, and this one checks all of the boxes for me. It's got a stunning location falling off these cliffs, with a well-defined shape and pool beneath it. I wouldn't say it's an earth-shattering waterfall or anything, but it did make this hike well worth doing and was a solid conclusion to an outstanding day. Overall, the Monongahela National Forest vastly exceeded expectations, with just about every stop also exceeding expectations. It's one of the most surprisingly beautiful parts of the eastern United States and by far one of its top national forests. I'd strongly recommend devoting a day to all of the locations in this video, 2 if you factor in Nelson Rocks and its Via Ferrata. But if you think we missed any spots, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, give me a like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe to Travel Dash for more content like this in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.